Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Morena everyone, I hope you are having a fabulous week. So this week I have the pleasure of chatting to my good friend Sara Lake. Now Sara is a New Zealand registered nutritionist who is also a certified intuitive eating counsellor. And this is what we spend the majority of our time discussing today. Sara has a health science degree in psychology and a Master of Science degree in human nutrition, both from Massey University. And she's also completed the Psychological Approaches for Weight Concerns module, which makes her really experienced with regards to the psychological element of diet culture, losing weight, and potentially a more appropriate approach for someone who is in that space and feels unable to kind of get out of it. For most of Sara's working life, she's been heavily involved with the food and supplement industry, and she works in product development, regulation, and health and nutrition claims. And so Sara has so many feathers to her cap that we could have talked for hours on a number of different topics. She's that knowledgeable. Instead, for this conversation, we spend our time discussing the principles behind intuitive eating, how they fit with health at every size, and whether there is any synergy with diet culture or actually there's not, and why not. It was such a great conversation. And you can reach Sara at nznutritionist.com on the internet, and she's also very active on Instagram as well with that same handle at nznutritionist. So I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Sara Lake. Hey Sara.
Hi Mikki.
How are you this morning?
I'm good, thanks. I feel like this is the pinnacle of my career right here, right now.
Well, you really should, because yes, to come on and be a guest on Mikkipedia is, one of the best things that you could possibly do for your career. So well done.
The highest honour.
Exactly. Yeah. And really, what better way to kind of wrap up a week, really, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Nice.
It's Friday. We're not quite having, a wine podcast, though. It's early.
It is. We could have had a champagne breakfast kind of start to a virtual breakfast. Actually, now that you mention it, that would have been ideal. But perhaps next time. Because, look, the reality is, out of all of my colleagues, you are certainly one where I feel there is just so many topics that we could sit down and discuss based on your experience and, your career and also your studies and stuff, that we are focusing on intuitive eating today. I'd like to get into other things as well, but they may really be the realm of another podcast, because this in itself is, this is probably hours worth of discussion that we could have.
It is. It's a huge topic, but it's also a really exciting topic to talk about.
Yeah.
We won't run out of things to say, that's for sure.
Well, that's good. Well, Sara, I'm really interested. You've got a Bachelor of Health Science in Psychology and obviously a Master's in Nutrition. That doesn't necessarily automatically mean that we're going to get this level of information in and around intuitive eating. And I feel like it's a really misunderstood area. And I say that because I myself, I'm not really clear on how you might approach something like this with someone who is kind of struggling with their quote unquote relationship with food, if you like, and whether or not it is even possible to intuitively eat in this, I suppose, modern day environment where there are so many hyperpalatable foods which might override some of our more natural kind of cues. So, but before we go into that, can you please, because I feel like that in itself is, could be an hours long discussion. Could you tell me how you kind of came about studying more in-depth intuitive eating? Because I'm pretty sure you're one of the only people I know who is actually certified in it.
Yeah, well, it's been a long process, and it is an interesting story. I've been in and around nutrition and food for a very long time, but my interest in intuitive eating came about through the resolution of my own eating disorder. So back in my late teens and early 20s, I was suffering quite a lot with an eating disorder. Binge eating disorder was the main crux of it, but it also ventured into other areas. I was just generally very disordered around food. And the system that I used to recover from that was based around various books that I'd found in the library that were happening around that time. So this is in the early 90s here, right?
Yeah.
Um,
that was like last millennia.
I know. you probably weren't even born. Oh, hang on. It was so I had picked up the idea of developing a more natural, or going back to a kind of a relationship with food and my body that I had when I was younger, before the disorder kicked in. And
how old were you, Sarah?
So I would have been in my eating disorder started when I was about 15.
Yeah.
By the time I decided I was over it and wanted to get rid of it, I wanted to be normal again. I was around 23, 24.
Okay. And did you have help from someone else, in the kind of counseling arena, a dietitian?
Yeah. I was at Otago Uni at the time, and I went to the psychologist there, but I only went to two sessions, and I was like, nah, she doesn't get me. For a start, binge eating disorder was not at that time recognized.
So that's different now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It was not in the DSM, and it was, I didn't know what I had. But looking through these books at the time, and this is just before intuitive eating came out. So I believe the first version of it was published in 1995.
Yeah.
But by then I'd already done a lot of the work based around other books and just based around thinking, how did I want to be? And the first thing I did was something that is a big part of intuitive eating, which is take the rules away.
Okay.
Because what I've been trying to do was live on a very strict, no additives, no sugar, nothing processed. And I was also trying to do a bit of fasting, and I was just like, I was a mess, and it was all resulting in kind of breakout binge eating that was really distressing to me because I couldn't control it. So I'd almost got there. I was pretty much well on the way. And then the intuitive eating book came out, and I read it, and I was like, oh my God, this is just exactly what I'm trying to do. This is great. They've got it all down here. It's in a structured framework, and it has changed a bit over the years. So they're on the 4th edition now. But at that time it was like, yes, and all the little worksheets and everything were kind of what I'd been doing for myself anyway, trying to monitor my hunger and fullness levels, dealing with my emotions, all of that. It's just a sort of a very in-depth process of self-awareness and self-knowledge.
Yeah, interesting. And what I find really interesting from just your kind of talking us through your journey is just your acknowledgement that, part of your eating disorder was around these rules and these restrictions. And it's an interesting spectrum as to first what actually is an eating disorder. And you mentioned the DSM, the diagnostic statistical manual.
It's like it records all the diagnoses for psychiatric illnesses.
That's the thing, right? And I feel like that's something that we have to acknowledge, because often people, you often see out in social media, and this is a bit of a tangent away from our discussion around intuitive eating, but I do feel it's related, is that, that certain behaviors or patterns, or like intermittent fasting, or if you want to go paleo or do keto, then this is clearly a sign of an eating disorder because of the food choices. But it's much more like an eating disorder isn't about food, it's about that psychology.
I mean, what you're describing there, those various trendy diets, Definitely what I would think of as part of diet culture. However, if you're choosing to eat that way, that doesn't mean you have an eating disorder.
Yeah.
You could
Yep.
be eating anyway and be a normal eater. There's plenty of normal eaters that eat in what you would think of as very strange ways just because of their food preferences or whatever. My sister, she never eats dessert, and she's just like, I'm just not a dessert person.
Yeah.
I do not relate to this, does not comprehend, does not compute. But, it's not what you eat, although what you eat can lead you into an eating disorder or be a symptom of one, but it's not necessarily that. But anyway, to continue how so that book came out and I filed it away in my memory. And years and years later, as soon as I popped out of my master's degree, I signed up for the intuitive eating certification training course with Evelyn Trebley.
So she was one of the creators, is that?
She's the co-creator of intuitive eating. Yes.
Yeah.
So to my great, this was, I did not foresee this happening, which is kind of around 2018, 2019 with social media, intuitive eating, which had kind of been slow burning all of this time. People knew about it, but it wasn't really out there. Suddenly it was everywhere.
Yeah.
It suddenly went boom, intuitive eating all over Instagram, which is my main social media. And so it popped back into my mind. I thought, I'm okay. As soon as I'm done with my master's, which took forever, as you know, you were there listening to my pain all the way through. As soon as I'd done that, I signed up for her course. I'd looked into it. There are other courses in non-diet nutrition.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be sure that I knew what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And that I was understanding it correctly. I felt like I had a good understanding, but I learned so much through doing that course.
Well, that's great, because I feel like I would know what intuitive eating is and I could describe it to someone. But as I kind of like kicked our call off by saying, is that it can be difficult, or the argument is it's difficult to be intuitive in this eating environment. And so someone cannot just go from a disordered eating pattern to be intuitive without changing their food supply. And this is how I feel about it too. So this is why I'm really looking forward to the discussion, because you'll help me understand it more. Because
I have a half-written blog post on this, which I must finish. It's taking a while because of it is a hard thing to describe how it works in terms of intuitive eating. Does not really buy into the idea that hyperpalatable foods mess with intuitive eating.
How do you feel about that? Do you agree with that?
Well, having seen it in work now, I have to say that I do. And also having looked at the research.
There is research around the hyperpalatable.
Oh my gosh, there's so much research.
Yeah.
There's so much research. However, none of this research does what I would like to see, which is where you take people that are at a stable weight and have a healthy relationship with food, and you present to them a real world situation where there is available a selection of processed and unprocessed foods and a wide selection of things. They eat ad libitum, and you just see what happens. They're not dieting, because a lot of this research is done in the environment of a hypocaloric diet, which tends to ramp up your appetite and make high sugar and high fat foods more attractive anyway. They have a greater effect on you.
So just to explain to people who aren't familiar, like a hypocaloric, what we're really saying is people are restricting their calories, eating less than what they necessarily need. And so that will absolutely drive hunger cues.
Yeah, and I have seen this at work now, and it's quite something to see, and I've been there myself, more to the point, so I know how it feels to think that you are addicted to food and can't stop eating certain foods, are horribly attracted to certain foods, obsess about certain foods. So with me, it was potato chips and ice cream. And I literally could not have these in the house. Once I got into I could have them in the house, but I had to admit to myself they would all be gone that
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
So that is the food addiction model, that there is something in these foods that we can't resist once we start eating them. Once I stopped dieting and started living for quite some time on a diet, nutrition, way of eating, where I wasn't losing weight or trying to lose weight or restricting any foods, suddenly I was not interested in these anymore. I remember one Easter where there was, people still, even when you're an adult, your mum gives you Easter eggs or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
and suddenly I looked in the fridge and I went, well, these are still all sitting here and I don't want them anymore.
Mm.
So it's a psychological feature of humans that when we restrict or deny ourselves something, it becomes more attractive. It's not just with food. Look at what happened. Actually, this is paraphrasing what Evelyn was saying on her Instagram the other day, but I'd already been thinking about this. Look at what happened when we went into lockdown, and suddenly people were anticipating running out of things.
Toilet paper.
Yeah, it's not even like they were running out of toilet paper yet. Did anybody actually run out of toilet paper?
Yeah.
And it's the same with food. You don't even have to be restricting. You just have to be thinking about restricting. And suddenly these things develop a halo of attractiveness.
So what you're really referring to is because the intuitive eating, that's, it includes 10 principles. And some are self-evident, but others, of course, I really would love your input and interpretation on and how you might practice these. But what you're really kind of talking to might be even that first principle of rejecting that diet mentality.
Yeah, I am talking about rejecting the diet mentality, but we're also talking about principle 3, which is make peace with food.
Yeah. Those forbidden foods.
It is the most misunderstood part of intuitive eating for the reason you said, which is that there is research showing that people eat more when presented with hyperpalatable foods. But as I was saying with the research, I haven't found any that does it in a real world situation. So they'll either be dieting them, the research is on people that are trying to lose weight, or it's an unreal situation where their choices were either unprocessed food or only processed food.
Okay.
And of course, you're going to eat more if all you have access to is processed food. But we're not in that situation. So, I mean, most people are not in that situation. So with this, making peace with food, it is the thing people jump on with intuitive eating and say, because the other part of it is giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. So you would have heard that.
Yeah.
You would have heard that. And people do interpret that as, oh, she's saying
eat all the things.
I'm supposed to eat. I'm supposed to throw my brain and all my knowledge of nutrition out the window and just eat processed foods all the time. Like we're never saying that eating chocolate instead of meals is healthy, or is what we're aiming for here. But we are taking morality out of it. So if you do eat a chocolate bar for breakfast, you haven't done something bad. It's not like you murdered somebody. It's not something you have to beat yourself up about. It can all be part of it. It can all be part of it. You don't have to tell yourself you'll never eat chocolate again. You would be so familiar with that with your work as well, that when somebody is anticipating a restrictive diet, a common thing is for them to go on a kind of pre-diet Last Supper food funeral splurge that may last days or weeks.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really interesting what you say, because what I would, one of the terms that whole morality around food, like that's real virtual signaling. Like you'll see on social media, people will post up the most quote unquote perfect meals, and you kind of feel almost like it's a sign to the rest of the world that they are this perfect, amazing human being, because they're eating in a certain way. And I mean, there are certain, if I think about like veganism, for example, is often painted with this whole kind of morality attached to it, which is understandable given how people understand the science or misunderstand the science around some of the environmental costs, but certainly animal welfare and things like that, which I'm not judging anyone on that, but like everyone has their own belief system and what they value. But you often, if you kind of look at certain dietary approaches, it might be more prevalent, that whole virtual signaling and morality, than others. And if I just add in here as well, one of the terms I really hate, well, two terms I hate. One is clean eating. I cannot stand that
Eat
at
in the
all.
shower.
Yeah. So if you're not eating foods which fall under that umbrella of clean eating, does that therefore make you eating, dirty foods? What is you just have to think about what the opposite, what it's implying.
Yeah.
And then guilt-free. And this is on everything, so and so something is guilt-free, etc., etc. And like there are certainly foods which I love and I eat, but I really hate the way that they are promoted as such.
It's a guilty treat.
It is, yes, totally. So I feel like you're absolutely right. There is so much of that kind of psychology in and around food.
What you're talking about there is diet culture. Diet culture, the idea that by manipulating your diet and your body size, you are a better person. I mean, that is just one aspect of diet culture. There's more to it than that. But that, when you're eating these things, and it is definitely a thing on social media, it portrays you in a certain way. When you are eating a certain way, what does that mean? It means you are a successful person. It means you are an attractive person. You're lovable. You have self-discipline. And people who don't eat like that don't have those things, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting as well, because this is totally tied up to kind of weight stigma as well, right? Like if you look at the research as to people who carry excess body weight and the, research in and around kind of employment and level of attractiveness and people's opinions on them, they are often kind of cast as less employable, less attractive, don't look after themselves, there's no self-care, that kind of thing. So that's kind of related?
Oh, it's very related. So what you're talking about is closely related to, but not quite, the health at every size paradigm, which intuitive eating comes under the umbrella of. Now, I can't talk too much about health at every size because I haven't really studied it in depth, and I can't say that I fully understand all the nuances of it.
I mustn't understand the nuances, because when I see it, I'm like, hang on, that's like, there is some disconnect. I just don't understand it, I don't think, because...
No, I'm getting more into it, into the understanding of it, which is... how to describe this. So there's this idea that if you're carrying a certain level of body fat, that must automatically be unhealthy. And I've kind of deconstructed that. I've been looking about at metabolic health, and health varies no matter what your size is. I mean,
100%.
Yeah. But the other side of looking at it is how accurate is this research that shows excess, as we could say, a higher level of body weight is unhealthy. How accurate is that research that correlates this level of body fat with these health outcomes? And the reason is because what you're saying, weight stigma. So as you know, I did my research project for my master's with women who had bariatric surgery. And I was there able to discuss in depth the stigma and discrimination that many of them had experienced. By the way, I'll say not all of them had.
Mm.
So some of them said that they had been in larger bodies all their lives, and the reason they had this surgery had nothing to do with weight stigma. Now, whether that's true or not, or whether it had just gone so far underground that it was experienced as normal, is one thing. So when you're looking at weight and health, you have this impact of weight stigma, and part of that is a reluctance to engage with the medical system. So what you see is, for example, with diagnosis of diseases and cancer particularly, is a later diagnosis for several reasons. One, because they delay going to the doctor because they know it's likely they'll just be told to lose weight. And the second one is just larger body size means that particularly cancer may take longer and be bigger by the time you feel it. Then there's the other side of it. There's a great confronting research paper showing that in the oncology system, quite often people in larger bodies are not given the correct dose of chemo because chemo is weight titrated.
Yeah.
And doctors may be unwilling to go as high as that person needs. So how does that play into, how do those two things play into these statistics that we see around larger bodies and cancer? And that's just one thing.
Yeah.
Same with joint problems. Now, nobody is saying that everybody can be healthy in any size body. Nobody is saying that, not even in, the health at every size books.
Yeah.
However, this idea we have that, oh, you're in a larger body, you must be unhealthy. Let's fix that by making you smaller.
Yeah.
We might give you an eating disorder, but oh well.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it's that, I guess probably some of the disconnect in terms of understanding is health at any size. People then, therefore, the opposite must be true. Like, so the message is you can be healthy in any body size. People are like, well, no, that can't be true because of everything, all that we've just talked about with metabolic health and disease and stuff like that. Like I feel this is why it's good we're having this conversation, Sarah, because I often see intuitive eating and health at any size kind of together. They are quite separate.
Well, they're related, but like I said, I can't say how related they are. So health at every size is also intersectional. So it brings in aspects of racism particularly and looks at the wider social picture, social determinants of health. Now, some of that also comes into intuitive eating, but like I say, I'm kind of at a beginning. I consider myself at a early stage of learning about all that.
Yeah.
So I don't want to speak up too loud on that just yet and get it wrong, but at the same time, there's the danger of saying nothing and thereby, exactly that, saying nothing and so not helping.
Let's move on then to the second principle of intuitive eating, which is honor hunger. Yeah. And what I will say is with a lot of people I work with, they are afraid to be hungry. So, and it's in part because in their head, to be hungry means that they are unsure that they'll be able to control themselves at the next meal and then binge eat. So can you talk to us a little bit about how intuitive eating kind of approaches this?
Honor your hunger. Yeah, it's a good one. It's an interesting one because there is that side to it. There's also the people that say they never get hungry.
Yeah.
Or that they have become so accustomed to ignoring their body signals that they don't recognize hunger.
Yeah.
So sometimes honoring your hunger, when I'm working with somebody with intuitive eating, we don't often do it in order. It's not like, principle one, okay, a couple of weeks, we get that out of the way, next one. There's an assessment scale developed by researcher Tracy Tilker that runs through the person you have in front of you and where they might be at, and indicates the practitioner where to start.
Okay.
So with the type of clients that I'm working with, honor your hunger is often kind of usually the third or fourth thing we would work on. A lot of them are coming from a history of binge eating disorder, which really does mess with your hunger. And and there is also a fear of hunger because it may drive you to a binge. And I think the fear of hunger also comes from dieting, because it's quite common in dieting to kind of want to save your calories for later in the day.
Yeah.
And so hunger is a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And
early in the
often
day.
and often people don't trust themselves. So when I'm
No.
talking to clients as well, and they have that style of eating, which I have to say, time restricted eating can encourage it as well, where people are like, oh, I'm not at all hungry until 1 or 2 o'clock. But then I can't not. Then I start eating and it's like I can't stop, or I'm grazing, or I've had a massive dinner, but I'm still not satisfied, although I'm full, and I think that's a phenomenon that a lot of people kind of have. And if I try to encourage them to eat earlier, in their head, they're like, well, I'm just going to be eating more in general because I'm still going to be that hungry. So it's trusting the body's signals, but
that's exactly it. They think that if they honor their hunger early in the day, they're going to overeat that day.
Yeah.
But I used to have that mindset. I think everybody's that's dieted has been there. You've got a certain number of calories for the day, and if you use them all in the morning, you're going to be starving at night.
Yeah, basically. In your experience, when you work with clients in and around their hunger cues, what do you see? What subsequently happens when you work on this?
Well, it's not quite as easy as just tuning in with yourself and saying, am I hungry? Although eventually it can become that. Because there's another side to it, which is figuring out, are you hungry, or is this an attempt at emotional regulation?
Okay.
Now, it's not bad to eat for emotional reasons.
And who doesn't, food is tied into emotions, so and it's not just eating when you're sad, depressed, angry, stressed. It's when we're happy we eat,
That's
when we're excited we eat.
And so it's quite the process of figuring out, am I hungry? How hungry am I? Am I kind of hungry that I would like a snack, or am I hungry enough that it's time for a meal, even if it's not at mealtime? And then there's also the aspect of looking at how hunger works with your day. I mean, we're not babies that can just scream for food and our mum will come. We work and we pretty much have break times. So it's also that aspect of looking at, well, I was super hungry at lunchtime, so even though I ate to the level of my hunger at breakfast, maybe tomorrow I'll try eating more. So even though, or I wasn't even hungry at breakfast time, however, I didn't get a chance to eat until lunch, and then I stuffed my face with pies because I was absolutely ravenous. So sometimes honoring your hunger does mean eating when you're not hungry.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's something that people, I've always wondered what, because a lot of people say to me, I'm just natural. I've never wanted breakfast, and certainly we've moved on past those times of saying breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Sure, for some people it is, but for some people it's not. And I think is it about looking at subsequent kind of behavior and physiological cues and just kind to tie off them and to figure out whether or not eating is important.
We're always looking at context, and also what has happened. Have you had a very stressful day that's driven you to snack in the afternoon, even though you weren't really hungry? Although an afternoon snack is generally a good idea I think 3 or 4 hours without food is probably a good amount of time. That's another matter. But so dealing with emotions is important because although it's fine to eat for emotional reasons, sometimes it's also important to learn how to deal with feelings appropriately.
So what is your advice for someone then who may recognize that they eat for emotional reasons more so than that they're hungry, really hungry?
Yeah, well, and sometimes this may require referring them to a psychologist. It may be more than I can do.
Yeah.
They may need somebody who's a professional in mental health.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of drilling down, where does this need to eat come when I'm not hungry come from? And what is it that I really need?
Yeah.
And it's looking at self-care. We're pretty bad at self-care in general, and food is an easy form of self-care, but it's not always what we really need. We might need rest.
Yeah.
We might need to just button off and get out into nature, or we might need social connection.
Yeah.
That what do we really need in this situation? And quite often we've become so used to not looking after our needs that it can take a while to figure out what they really are.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And particularly that what you say about referring on to a psychologist or a counselor or something like that to kind of delve a bit deeper. I've made that recommendation to a number of people over the years. And I have to say with mixed success, basically, because sometimes you're telling people things that they don't want to hear, because they're coming to see me for a food plan. They disconnect that, or they disassociate their feelings and their emotions with actually their food and my role, I think. Whereas, you and I both know that as practitioners in nutrition and seeing clients as nutritionists, like, you cannot dissociate the two. Like, it's, food and feelings and stuff is all kind of wound up.
Yeah, it is. That's basically why I went through psychology and then nutrition in my uni life, even though it meant I was at uni forever. Definitely. Sometimes when people come to a nutritionist, they are feeling uncomfortable with themselves and their body, and they've come to the conclusion that this is because they need to lose weight.
Yeah.
And there are maybe odd occasions where you can tweak the diet a little bit, the nutrition, and their body was ready and they do lose weight, but it doesn't, if that happens, it doesn't usually solve their dissatisfaction with themselves.
Yeah, interesting, Sarah.
Yeah, and often that wasn't really the issue.
Yeah.
So even if sometimes their weight appears very much to be the issue in their minds, it can often be because of the stigma they've received because of their size, if you see what I mean.
I see what you mean. And so until they address that, their desire for weight loss or to be in a smaller body is likely, like, that may come, but not until they actually deal with the underlying issues.
Yeah, well, also weight stigma is actually not something that the individual can stop.
Yeah.
So there are techniques for dealing with it, but really it's a societal problem, which just seems huge. I mean, it is everywhere, this idea that basically people in larger bodies, it's almost the last acceptable stigma, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're made fun of, in movies. People in fat suits being the stupid person, or the stupid version of somebody that later becomes thin and intelligent. So the emotions that somebody is having around the size of their body are not often all in their might.
Yeah.
No, it's often real. And the desire to be thinner to stop this is also real.
Yeah.
However, that brings into the next thing is how successful is it to slim people down by diet and exercise? And then, how successful are we at making people thinner? And then how successful is being thinner on making people happier?
Yeah. And that's like an entirely like a 10-part podcast series in
that's right.
itself,
It
really,
really
isn't
is.
it?
And I was reading, there was a new meta-analysis, new being April 2020, being how far behind I am on my reading, showing that overall, I mean, this is not the only one. There are tens and tens of meta-analyses from important places like Harvard and UCLA, University of Minnesota, meta-analyses looking at the success of weight loss interventions. And this one looked at 14 different named diets. So we're talking the Atkins diet, the Mediterranean diet, paleo, whatever. And concluded, maximum weight loss from these plans was 6 months to a year. And from that point, everybody was on a trajectory of weight gain.
Yeah.
So by 5 years, nearly everybody had regained back all the weight on all the diets. And however, some of the plans particularly the Mediterranean style of eating, had sustained health improvements in terms of cardiovascular risk factors, inflammation markers, and cholesterol and that kind of thing. So more and more studies coming out like this. So we have to ask ourselves, really, what are we doing? This is where I came to. It's depressing. We're nutritionists. We want to think that somebody comes to us and we can help them lose weight, and sometimes we can, but we have to say, there's a pretty high chance that if you do lose weight, you will gain it back. That's just reality. We don't want to face it, do we?
I suppose if the diet industry had figured out how to lose weight and keep it off, there would be no diet industry, basically. And I had a chat to Dr. Eric Helms, which is actually how you came up, Sarah, because we were talking about how, because he works with a lot of physique athletes, and so they're and just people who are actually just wanting to lose weight, this is just what they want. And I feel like you and I would be on the same page. It's a valid thing for someone to want, and I feel, a lot like there's a lot of kind of bashing out there in social media about even the idea that someone might want to lose weight. Whereas obviously, that this is the area that I work in all the time, and I talk in, and I'm really passionate about trying to help people. And Eric and I were talking about the whole maintenance, and people often don't practice maintenance within their weight loss journey. So it's, so losing weight is fairly simple. I'm not going to say easy, because some people don't find it easy, but it is actually quite a simple thing to do. And it's keeping it off is the problem, because you then are like, well, if this is what it took for me to lose weight, I've now got to try and figure out, how it is that I maintain this in and around all of the physiological changes and the psychological changes that occur. It's certainly challenging.
This is it's interesting, because we're talking about the 10 principles of intuitive eating. There's also 4 stages. So I've just got the book right here.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember how exactly it's put. Oh, yeah. So the stage 1 of a person who's right to go down the intuitive eating pathway is hitting diet bottom.
Yeah, nice.
So you're over it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are ready to not diet again. So typically that would be the person who has lost weight and regained it, possibly multiple times. And they're not willing to do that again. Or they've lost weight and maintained it, but the process of maintaining it was making them miserable.
Yeah.
I've had a few people like that also. And it may be healthier for that person to relax a bit, live in a slightly bigger body, or even a much bigger body, and be
Happier.
mentally healthy.
Yeah, sure. What about,
Yeah.
what's the second one, Sarah?
Oh, sorry, the stages of intuitive eating. Yeah, the 4 stages. So the second one is that where you start learning in intuitive eating. It's called exploration.
Yeah.
So what I like about intuitive eating is it's a kind of no-fail system. Doesn't matter what you do, it's still getting you in the right direction.
Yeah.
Conscious learning and pursuit of pleasure. Now that sounds a bit like you're going all hedonistic and, you know, rolling around in green jelly or whatever. But no, it's more just getting away from the idea that you have to deny yourself and suffer in life with food in order
nice.
to get where you want. Stage 3, crystallization, which is where you're getting a grip on it all. And then stage 4 is called the intuitive eater awakens. Sounds quite spiritual, doesn't it? It is a bit of a, I guess, psychological, spiritual process. So
yeah. And so, Sarah, so we've got these 10 principles, which we haven't actually gone through all of them, and we will.
We do that. So
however, and then you've got these stages. So what I'm going to do is park those stages, come back to them after we kind of cover all of the principles, which actually, even though we've only kind of highlighted a few of them, we've actually covered a lot of what I'm... quite a bit. But I want to know how that actually all kind of fits together. Now, one of the things, like challenging the food police, and is this where someone takes a stand against a certain way of thinking and around what's good, what's quote unquote good, quote unquote bad.
There's 2 sides to it. One is challenging your internal rules around food that you've developed through a lifetime of living in diet culture. And the other one is actually challenging the food police around you in terms of the people around you. Particularly for somebody in a larger body. You know, everybody thinks they have a right to comment on what they eat. And so there are some techniques we use to sort of how to handle those situations.
What are a couple of those techniques?
Well, one of them is when you know you're walking into a situation where there's a high chance people are going to start talking about what you're eating or your body, say Christmas with your family. You have a kind of pre-planned exit strategy. To literally leave. Or take a break. You know, so when you arrive, you go, you know, I've got to zip out at blah blah hour. That is one of them. The other is learning non-confrontational communication techniques around how these things make you feel. So things like when you comment on my eating, it makes me feel uncomfortable. I would prefer it if you didn't comment on what I eat. You know, you know, when it makes me feel, I would prefer sort of phrasing is supposed to be a non-confrontational way of letting somebody know that what they're doing is you would prefer that they didn't.
And you know, I feel like I can see why that would be non-confrontational, because you're not, the person hopefully won't, well, ideally they would not get defensive and feel that blame from you, because you're actually taking ownership. It's not necessarily them, it's how you feel about them saying it.
That's right. You're telling them how it makes you feel, and if they like you, they'll care about how you feel. Sometimes they're just assholes. Oops, sorry.
It's fine. I'll put an E on it.
No, it's not too bad a word, is it?
No.
And they will continue to harass, and then you have a choice. You know, what are you going to do with that person? Do you need that person in your life? You know, it's kind of hard if they're your husband or whatever, but
well, do you know, it's really interesting. I was, just before we move on to the next point, I was chatting to someone on social media, and she was talking about her own kind of journey in and around
weight loss, and she said for her, and so she used to be bigger, and now she's she's a different size, and she was mentioning it on social media, and she said one of the things which really helped her was actually letting go of other people in her life that were affecting how she her relationship with food, if you like. So whilst it was a journey for her, and it included losing weight, and she's been at this now stable lower body weight for a number of years with no it's not a hardship for her at all. She's very comfortable where she's at. It was that recognizing that there are people who may not be helpful, but that's difficult though, like that's because because that's a whole message in and around how you communicate with other people, and having to deal with actually the bigger issues, which and that's just a challenge.
A lot of research around weight stigma, particularly at an early age, and particularly coming from weight teasing and food comments coming from an early age, and particularly coming from family, are associated with weight gain. So there's a lot going on there.
Well, I had someone close to us when we were growing up, and I remember going to a birthday party and bringing out like the fondue dessert. I even remember what was on the dessert table because it was delicious, and I'm like, I love caramel. And the woman said, "Oh, Mikki, I knew you'd be the first one up."
Ooh, yeah, it sticks, doesn't it?
Well, that was like, I think I was 8 or 9. That was literally like 35 years ago, and it is, and I still remember that person as making comments on me being bigger than my twin sister. I was a chubby girl growing up, and they let me know it, and that really developed. No, and it really played a large part in developing how I kind of, negotiated food and exercise and stuff throughout my years, and certainly in a non-healthy manner, so that, it's a challenging space for
everybody's
some people.
Got a story like that.
Yes, don't they?
Oh yeah, it's just, people don't think. I hate it when I'm around adults that comment on children's bodies or what they're eating. Because if they haven't experienced an eating disorder or dysfunctional relationship with food themselves, they don't know what they're doing.
100%. And you know what? Sometimes adults do think, and adults are mean to children, and and that's just, and it's really interesting because as a stepmom now, and I haven't had the luxury of having children in my life for a large part of my adult years. It's only been in these last kind of 3 or 4 years. I'm really mindful of how I speak to the kids about everything, not just food, but just, how I interact with them, because I recognize the negative impact that certain comments had with how I then went on, and I remembered them, and it does taint my memory of certain people. And I'd hate for some kind of thoughtless comment to have that same impact.
Yeah, I remember one of the triggers for me starting dieting, because the thing is this, with the comments, the most common thing that happens is you start dieting and then you rebound eat, and that's what causes the weight gain, right? The diet, it's the weight cycling not only causes weight gain, but it's horrible for your health. In any case, for me, it was Pony Club. And the instructor was going around, she was sort of describing how to sit your thigh muscle kind of nicely on the saddle so that it looks flat.
Oh.
And she went around the group and was going, "Oh, but you girls don't have much, you guys don't have much flab. Oh, you've got none. Look at you, you're really skinny. Oh, yes, Sarah, you've got a bit." It was like, and before then I had not even thought to compare my body to the other horse riders.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, there was more adults that made comments on my body, but that's just that
is a prime example.
Yeah, it's a prime example of a thoughtless adult.
Yeah, basically.
Just not thinking.
Yeah. So, Sarah,
Anyway,
I know,
oh my
we
gosh,
could
we've gone-
talk for
we've
hours
gone
on
there.
that, because I feel like we could each share personal stories that almost every listener would kind of resonate with,
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so principle number 5 on my list would be respecting fullness. And I do, I feel like this is a
Yeah.
really important thing, because this will tie into hunger cues, right?
Yeah.
It's recognizing when you're full. Can you just describe this a little bit more in a
Yeah,
way?
it's actually a difficult principle.
Mm,
The hunger signal is the fullness signal is much weaker than the hunger signal.
yeah.
So that's probably just evolution.
Mhm.
Trying to make us desperately hungry and not really making us desperately full.
Well, because of course
But
that would be really advantageous, wouldn't it?
exactly.
It would mean if there is food there, we're going to eat
eating,
it,
guys.
because
Yeah,
it's not
just
always going to be there.
Yeah, that's right. Feeling your fullness is also something that can come very slowly to somebody that's coming out of dieting. Now, I don't know if you experience this when you've dieted yourself down a bit too skinny. Then when you go back to eating, you can have something called extreme hunger.
I've seen people talk about
Yeah.
it, actually, like on social
Yeah.
media and stuff. I've seen stories of women who have recognized that they just cannot, like physique athletes, particularly after competing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's when I got into it. So I should explain that although I resolved my binge eating disorder with intuitive eating back in my early 20s, I relapsed in my early 30s when I got into bodybuilding and physique, and it got my body fat very low, and it caused a relapse of my binging. I could have seen that coming, but of course I didn't.
Yeah.
So you see that, and it doesn't even need to be if you've got your body fat very low. It could be if you had been much bigger and you have dieted to get yourself smaller, but you're still big.
Yeah.
When you start taking off the reins, it takes a while for your body to get the message, okay, we're out of the diet, we're out of the famine. And then the fullness signal starts to kick in, but for a while it may be virtually absent. You can eat a huge amount of food and genuinely not feel fullness because your appetite hormones have gone crazy, leptin, ghrelin, all a bit wonky because of a neuropeptide Y, all a bit weird because you've been dieting for so long. So there's that aspect. So the other thing is with feel your fullness is people that have dieted following meal plans have often got very much into the habit of eating everything in front of them because that's all they're going to get.
Yeah.
So they don't get a chance to pay attention to their fullness, because if they're full, it doesn't matter. They're going to eat it anyway.
Yeah.
And if they're not full, it doesn't matter because they can't have more.
Yeah.
So,
often these people don't like sharing food either. And it's really interesting because I used to have that mentality too. And I have to really struggle. I struggle a little bit now, actually. Like I have no qualms taking food from other people's plates without asking. But, if I'm sitting there with Baz and we're having something, and then he takes something from my plate, and like my default reaction is, hang on, I'd already counted that I was going to eat that. It's a very ingrained behavior from the years of dieting when I was younger, because that was all I was going to eat. That is my food, and without it, I'm kind of going without. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I've had that as well. I'm not like that now though, which is amazing. I'm completely relaxed with food now. It's such a nice place to be. But yeah, so that is fullness. It sort of comes on slowly. I'd be checking with people, so how's it going? Sometimes we do an exercise where I'll ask them to serve up half of what they would normally serve up, and they can go back for more, but it provides a natural stopping point, because the other thing is when you've come out of heavy dieting, quite often you eat fast.
Yeah.
Because you're always going to your meal completely ravenous.
Yeah.
And you've probably been fantasizing about it for hours. And so just slowing down, we do things like that, slowing down. So that is a good one. I don't bother with setting timers and count your chews and all that, but just stop, pause, create a way to pause halfway through your meal.
Well, I got to say, so of course we've all read the literature that says you need to eat, chew your meals, chew your mouthful 20 to 30 times and eat in an undistracted manner with no TV, nothing around, no books. And look, I'm actually just I'm a realist. I'm just like, so I'm like you, I'm like, just focus on eating slowly and chewing and swallowing before you put your next fork full up, because often people shovel. But certainly we've got to kind of take into account that some of the behavioral cues that may have been appropriate 30 years ago or 20 years ago when there wasn't so many distractions around, just it's a little bit unrealistic to say to someone, sit in a quiet room and eat your food.
When I tend to, so that is kind of mindful eating, what you're talking about there. I do get people to do that, but as a kind of a regular thing, like maybe once a week.
Oh, nice.
Pick one meal and you're doing mindful eating with it, proper mindful eating. So you're looking at it, you're sensing your body, scan your body. What's your level of hunger? It's a kind of an exercise that is separate from regular eating. However, the things you learn there sort of filter into
everyday eating.
Yeah.
But, interesting.
Yeah. So, that's so that over time people do learn to feel their fullness, and it can feel like all types of different things. And it depends on what type of food you're eating as well. You will learn that some foods make you feel full quickly. Other foods you don't feel the same, but you actually are full.
Yeah, interesting.
Fullness isn't just a stomach sensation, and nor is hunger, actually.
Yeah.
It can just be that you're losing interest in your meal.
Yeah.
Or that it's not tasting as good as it did before.
I can't imagine losing interest in a meal, to be honest. Like that's it's almost like people who say they forget to eat. I'm like, how do you forget to eat? Like, what do you mean
I do that now. I went to the supermarket.
Amazing.
I was like, I forgot to have breakfast.
Ah.
Yeah, but that definitely came with not trying to keep my body thinner. I am a bit bigger than I was, not heaps, but definitely at a size that it took a bit of mental work to come to terms with.
Yeah.
But with that comes all of that stuff. I just don't think about food as much as I used to. I don't mind, people taking stuff off my plate, although, depends how they do it, I guess, and who they are.
Well, it's interesting that whole, I don't think about food all the time. People often say that if you're thinking about food all the time, clearly you've got some issue going on. I know plenty of people who are completely, who do not have any mental distress in and around their diet that think about food because they actually just love to eat. Like, I don't think, so, if you're out there thinking, oh my God, I actually really enjoy looking forward to and planning my meals, it just doesn't mean that you are, you've got some kind of unconscious eating issue. So I think
it would be a matter of when you're thinking about food. Like, there's thinking about food that's appropriate, and there's thinking about food that's probably a sign that you're not eating enough. If you're sitting in a meeting
totally,
and you can't stop thinking about food, or if you're waking up in the night thinking about what you're going to eat the next day, then that may be an indication that you've become a little bit hyper-focused on food.
Well, do you also think that if you're hungry and thinking about food and denying yourself eating, then that's probably when the thinking about food is actually a real issue, because you're thinking about food, but you're actually not doing anything about it because you're afraid about it.
Yeah, if you're hungry and you're thinking about what you're about to eat, then fine. That's normal and natural, and hopefully you would be thinking about what you're about to eat rather than just eating without thinking about what you can
because
eat.
We often as well, like we may have just finished breakfast and we're like, oh, hey, what's for dinner? And part of it is the planning process in our household.
Right. It's planning, and meal planning is not dysfunctional. Can be, but it's like everything, you know, it's how
it's contextual, eh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously this then, you know, if we talk about respecting fullness as principle number 5, then, you know, discover the satisfaction factor as principle
Yeah.
number 6. This is all going to be kind of part of it. And you mentioned how, you know, feeling full isn't necessarily just about the food or the amount of food, you know. So do you have anything that might add to what we've talked about there?
That's about, I feel like I say a lot. When I listen to this podcast, I'm going to be like, Sarah, you got to stop it.
I'll tell Barry to edit them all out, don't worry.
So discover the satisfaction factor is sometimes the first thing I start with people. And it's about figuring out what type of meal satisfies you. Now, some people misinterpret this as well, and thinking that what we're saying is eat only hyperpalatable, ultra glorious foods, because those are the most satisfying, but it's not that. Diet culture really takes away the satisfaction failure factor of food as a value when you're eating. So it's not really important if your meals are satisfying as long as they're correctly structured and of the right calorie level, right?
And what about protein here, Sarah? Because there is research to show, and we know that protein is much more satisfying than other nutrients. And there is actually research showing that if you eat your protein foods first, you're going to have less of a blood sugar response to your subsequent kind of meals.
Yeah. So what you're talking about there is satiation, which is related but different to satisfaction. Okay. So satisfaction is more of the psychological effect, and the sensual, I'm going to say, experience of eating. So we'll get back to satiation and protein, but so when looking at whether a meal is satisfying to you has to do with your experience of the food. So you would look at it, and it involves things like tastes and textures, flavors, you know, saltiness, sweetness. What do I feel like right now? You know, do I want something sweet? Do I want something salty? Could this meal do with some nuts for crunch? Yeah. You know, how can I make this meal more psychologically satisfying to me right now?
So yesterday morning, for example, because I'm big on different types of breakfasts, and at the moment, if I'm at home, it's usually like a smoothie type thing, like a smoothie bowl. And then yesterday morning, I was thinking about smoothie bowl, and I'm like, I actually don't think I'd be satisfied with that. And it took me about 20 to 30 minutes to figure out that, in fact, see, I love eggs with tomato sauce. Actually, I love it. And so I'm like, I think I want an omelette with some of those leftover veggies and have it with some cottage cheese and tomato sauce. I know that sounds a bit weird, but I realized that was what was going to satisfy me. Even though food volume and caloric value were all very similar, but just the different flavors, the textures, the temperature was different.
That's right. And you see, that is something that structured diets often take away from you, is the ability to make your meal emotionally satisfying. But the other thing you were talking about was satiation and protein, and that is definitely a thing. And I will quite often sort of encourage people to include more protein, because from a health perspective, many people are not eating enough.
Not going to disagree, as you know.
Yeah. And however, it's this idea that you should eat more protein because it makes you fuller for longer. Although that is a thing, and that is true, that's not really something I focus on, because if you eat less protein, all you discover is that you're hungrier sooner. And that protein isn't the only factor in satiation. As we know, there's also fiber and fat. So it's not that you need to eat protein because then you'll be fuller for longer. That's not kind of how I approach it, because being full for longer is something people need to discover on their own.
Yeah, and that makes sense
Yeah.
given your clientele and how you work with your with the clients that you see as well. And you're
Yeah.
right, like fiber is, just as an aside, that is such, for some people that is actually the game changer. I have a friend who feels like she could eat 4 eggs and feel pretty hungry an hour later, but if she has 2 eggs and in a salad with like a lot of fiber, she actually feels much more satisfied and much more satiated by that. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, satiation isn't something, I mean, there's this whole morals thing around, oh, you shouldn't feel hungry soon after a meal. You've done something wrong. There's something wrong with your body or whatever. But in fact, if you do feel hungry soon after a meal, that's normal, depending on what you ate. And it may not even be a problem. But you might want to tweak what you're eating so that you have a longer lasting satiation, just because it's annoying.
Yeah, it's funny actually what
But
I see on the keto social media and Facebook pages how people talk about, oh, you should not be hungry. If you eat this way, you'll never be hungry. And then there are people who legitimately are like, I must be doing something wrong because I still feel hungry even though I'm eating, macadamia nuts and cream and cheese and eggs and things like that.
Yeah, that's probably another whole podcast.
Yeah. And hey, I'm not dissing. I'm totally an advocate in the right context of a keto approach for some people, but just probably not the thousands of people that I see who are, not meeting their health goals yet, white knuckling it. So if we move on, we've really covered that kind of honor your feelings without using food, and you talked about, earlier on.
That principle now, I've just made some notes, like they're in the 4th edition of the book now, and the name of that's been changed. So it's now Cope with Your Emotions with Kindness.
Yeah, nice.
To sort of take away the without food bit, because sometimes coping with your emotion, because it makes it sound like if you do cope with your emotions with food, you're doing something wrong.
I get, interesting.
Yeah. So that's interesting, but we kind of have talked about that. Cope with your emotions appropriately and with kindness. Cut yourself some slack. We all live in a stressful world.
Yeah.
So the next one is respect your body.
And we've talked about this quite a bit as well, I feel.
Yeah, kind of. Quite interesting. Body respect is a good term that I use. There's lots of other ways, like, some people struggle to love their body or even like their body. Sometimes it can be a fraught relationship with issues.
Yeah.
And a bit like if there's somebody you don't quite like, but you may be able to respect them.
Yeah.
And so body respect is about looking at what your body does for you. And it can feel, when you don't like your weight, it can feel like everything's wrong with your body, and it can be hard to love your body, like your body, and body respect can take a bit of working on. So we look at things like, how does your body work? Isn't it amazing the things that it does? And eventually coming to a place of respect, and hopefully eventually you'll get to appreciate your body. So but yeah, we sort of have talked about that.
That's interesting as well. Because I like how it's not about love your body. Because then if you wake up one day, it doesn't matter what size you are, you're not always going to wake up and go, oh, I feel amazing, I look amazing today, because what you see in the mirror is almost always less of a reflection of what you can see staring back. It's what you actually perceive, And I remember, I think it was Stupid Easy Paleo, Steph Godot, I think I'm going to say that's her last name. She was really big on this last year, not about love your body. It was actually about, it's all right if you wake up and you don't love your body. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you.
You can't force yourself.
No, but that respect is different. And I often talk to people about thinking about what their body can do, and I think this is where as an athlete, I feel there's a real advantage because, and I use athlete in a really loose sense. I'm not meaning that you have to participate or compete in a particular sport, but actually that you just engage in physical activity, and you recognize, you may be able to lift a little heavier week on week, and you may be able to run a little faster week on week, or whatever it is that you do. And that, of course, plays in, I don't know how that plays into that next principle, the 9th one about exercise, but I feel like part of that respecting your body is appreciating what it can do and actually using it in a certain way. And I think
that's right. And it does come into nutrition as well. Respecting, because of course we're coming into the last principle of intuitive eating, which is honor your health with gentle nutrition, and respecting your body is related to that as well.
For sure.
Looking after yourself.
And what about principle 9, exercise, feel the difference?
Yeah, movement, feel the difference. So again, it's about pulling movement. It used to be exercise, but they've changed the terminology to movement.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be structured exercise.
Yeah.
Exercise has a kind of an aura of being about weight loss. It's not always, of course, but it can be.
That's a perception thing, because I wouldn't have said that actually, but it's just also our different experiences, because I have a real big history. This is part of my
performance. You're in the field of performance.
Yeah. But of course, so that really is a contextual thing. But I appreciate
the type of clients that I see quite often only exercised to try and lose weight. Yeah. And when that didn't work, they stopped exercising.
And some people choose not to exercise because they feel like it is going to impede their weight loss,
That's right, yeah. And
crazy.
And it can be confronting if you're in a larger body, or if you just don't have a great relationship with your body. Movement forces you to encounter your body.
Yeah.
It forces you to experience your body, what it can do, what it can't do. And so movement, feel the difference, is about the benefits of exercise on your mental health and on your physiological function that are not necessarily related to weight loss.
Because let's face it, if we could take all of the benefits of exercise and bottle them up and sell it, mate, we would be millionaires.
It has so much going for it.
Yeah, it really does.
Sometimes I'm sitting around feeling like my life sucks, and it's just because I've been, sedentary for a day or two. Get out, go for a walk, get some circulation happening around the body, and good again. Those endorphins are real.
Yeah, amazing, right? And then, Sarah, that last principle, which you mentioned, and I'll just restate, honor your health with gentle nutrition. This to me kind of brings it back to really nourishing your body with
that's right,
with food, which of course then, because you mentioned that a lot of people think intuitive eating is all about processed food, whereas actually I'd never thought that was all about processed food without even knowing the principles. Like, it didn't make sense to me that it would be that. So can you just talk us through what is meant by gentle nutrition?
It's gentle because we approach it in a way that attempts to avoid triggering people back into diet thinking.
Yeah.
So this is, it is common for people when they first embrace intuitive eating to go through a phase where they eat all the foods they didn't eat when they were dieting. Yeah. And also dieting has quite often given people a dysfunctional relationship, not just with play foods, being processed kind of foods you eat for fun
foods,
fun foods, but with regular foods as well, regular everyday foods, something like broccoli, which can be super tasty cooked right. Quite often they just won't touch it because it has psychological implications of being a diet food.
Yeah.
So it's about rehabilitating the relationship with good nutrition and making it about looking after your body. So, we don't, the authors of Intuitive Eating book are both have master's degrees in nutrition, and I think they're both dietitians actually.
Yeah.
In America. So they at no stage deny nutritional science and research, but it's about building it on a solid base and getting away from trends. Actually looking at what the science says around good nutrition. Like there's excellent science around getting decent levels of fruit and veggies. It's health protective. So how do we bring that in a way that's fun and life enhancing, rather than, eat 9 cups of veggies a day, just get it down you.
Yeah. Now, Sarah, so I guess, a couple of more broader questions is, is intuitive eating, is it incompatible with wanting to lose weight?
No, it's not incompatible with wanting to lose weight, but because that is a desire that I think could almost be considered normal given the environment that we live in. However, it is incompatible with intentionally pursuing weight loss while you are learning it. And the reason is because that sort of fractures your focus. So the terminology in the book and that we tend to use is, while you are mastering intuitive eating, you put weight loss on the back burner.
Yeah.
So it's there, it's there, you're not denying it's there. But it is not the focus of anything that we're doing here.
Okay.
So when it comes to weight may do anything with intuitive eating, because it depends on where you're starting and why you are the size you are when you're starting. So if you're working with somebody that's in a larger body and they're there because they're binge eating and have a dysfunctional relationship with food, involving using food for a lot of emotional reasons, and it's just, they're a bit of a mess in that way, and they manage to develop a more relaxed attitude to food and stop binging, then their weight may come down.
Yeah.
So anything can happen. In other people, if they've been restricting and keeping their body at what would be keeping their body at a particular weight via superhuman means, and we release off the reins, they may gain weight even if they were in a larger body to start with.
Yeah.
So it really depends on where somebody's at. And just as likely as nothing happens with weight, however, you have a far more functional relationship with food and feel better about it and body in general. So that's what we say. Anything could happen. It's a mystery.
And Sarah, finally, how would someone know that intuitive eating is for them? Is this that this is something that they need to do or should do, or are interested in doing?
Well, if you look at what intuitive eating is designed to achieve, so it is a framework for repairing your relationship with, how do they say it, with food, eating, your mind and your body. So if somebody gets to the point where they've hit diet rock bottom, as we say, and they realize that they're done with this and they want to do something different, then that is the type of person who intuitive eating may work for.
Okay. Yeah.
And by work, there's this idea that any program related to nutrition, it works when it makes you thinner.
Yes. And that is not what you're referring to.
No, that is not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is getting normal with food.
Yeah.
Being able to function in any situation where there's food without it causing stress.
Yeah. Interesting. And so, finally, because I did actually want to, like you mentioned again that hitting diet rock bottom, and that is, one of those kind of stages, if you like, which you mentioned around intuitive eating. How did this?
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask how those stages fit in with these 10 principles, which we've just covered.
Well, the stages are kind of, as you're working through the principles, you sort of progress through the stages as well.
Yeah.
It's just basically learning about intuitive eating and then slowly getting really comfortable with it, and then slowly feeling like the ultimate goal should be you're not even thinking about it anymore.
Yeah.
You're just doing it and it's become natural and normal. And it should be a natural, normal way. It's just that we've become abnormal with food.
Yeah.
I feel like, we live in a food environment that is so weird.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this is again a different perspective, which is why I'm so pleased that we've had this conversation today, because I would say the same for similar yet different reasons as well, and they're not wrong. These are just our different kind of perspectives. But I definitely appreciate much more some of those principles around intuitive eating, and can see how people would, people who I might talk to could really benefit from, investigating it further. So who are the creators? Is it Evelyn
Trebley
Trebley
and Elise Resch. I think that's how you pronounce her surname.
Yeah. And whilst, of course, there are resources and books in and around intuitive eating, obviously, are you taking clients, Sara?
Yes, I am. So I've got my website, nznutritionist.com, and I'm also on Instagram, nznutritionist.
You are I really enjoy your feed. I find it
both. Man, I go all over the place. I've been ranting about religion lately.
It has, but also I appreciate that. So that's fine. But not all, but if it's not for everyone, don't worry, because Sara also is an exceptional food photographer, I really enjoy your stories in and around just your everyday, day-to-day stuff too.
Photography. I have this kind of dream, if I could be like a photographer and blogger. I don't know how anybody makes money doing that though, but that would be great. Like my ideal life would be just taking photographs and blogging and writing.
Well, equally, and thankfully for the people who are listening to this podcast, you sound equally passionate about helping people restore their relationship in and around nutrition and food.
I'm so into it.
Yeah, which is fabulous.
About it. And it's such a big deal for me when people say things, like they don't think about food, they're not obsessed about food anymore, and they'll just drop it in, and I'll be like,
yeah, it's so rewarding, isn't it?
They'll just drop it in, like, I wasn't even thinking about food like I normally do, and I was like, oh, that's great, because it just shows that they're progressing, or they went for a walk and they loved it. And just seeing people, sometimes they don't even realize how well they're doing.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And I get really, really excited about it all.
Nice.
Or they have a relapse binge, but then we realize that's the first one they've had for 4 months or something.
Yeah.
And when they first started seeing me, they were binging every week.
Yeah.
Or a couple of times a week. And people don't realize how well they're doing until they look back.
That's awesome. Yeah. This for people will be super interesting. Sara, thank you so much for your time. I definitely want to, jump on the call again with you at some point to discuss one of your other many hats with regards to the food industry. But I'll include your links, and anyone who really, feels that they would really benefit from the type of, help that you can provide, absolutely hit Sara up on Instagram or go to her webpage, because she is open for business. Okay. Sara, thank you so much. And
thank you for having me. This has been great fun.
Great, lovely. And we'll talk soon.
Yes. Bye-bye. Have a lovely day. Great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
So team, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And I've got to say, I learned a lot about intuitive eating, because there are a lot of, I suppose, misconceptions out there as to what it is and whether or not it is actually possible to be an intuitive eater in this environment with which we live. And whilst, Sara and I might not align on all elements of our approaches in and around diet and the diet culture, I learned so much and really value her information. So I hope that you guys did too. And as I said, you can find Sara over at nznutritionist.com and also over on Instagram at nznutritionist, and she is really approachable, and you can absolutely contact her if you feel that you would like to work with her with regards to intuitive eating. And next week on the podcast, I have my mate Cliff Harvey back on the call discussing your questions related to nutrition. We have a good old chinwag as per usual, so I hope you stick around for that. And if you do enjoy what you hear on the podcast, please go to your podcast platform, hit subscribe, review the podcast, get the word out there, because the more people that review the podcast, the more other people are aware that it even exists, and the more that we can get some of this really interesting information into the ears of people who might want to hear about it. And I certainly don't take lightly the fact that you guys take the time to tune in each week and listen to the people that I have on. If you have any requests for people you want to hear me interview or topics that you would like to see discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know who those people might be. And you can contact me on Facebook at Williden Nutrition, over on Instagram and Twitter at Williden, or on my website, mikkywilliden.com, where you can also sign up to one of my online coaching plans, whether it is weight loss, a keto longevity diet you're after, just a decent old food plan to help you figure out what to eat on a day-to-day basis, or you're an athlete and you want to fuel your performance, I'm going to have a plan for you. So that is a 28-day meal plan with shopping lists, a weekly email that covers a different research topic almost every week, and a weekly forum over on our members-only Facebook page where you get Q&A with yours truly, in addition to actually just having access to my brain 24/7 through our in-app messaging system. And that is just a great way to support the podcast, really, by signing up to one of the nutrition coaching plans. And a number of people have reached out to me to ask how they're able to do that. So that at this point in time is your best option. And of course, I am also available for one-on-one consultations too. So until next time, peeps, have a fab week. Catch you next Wednesday. See you later.